Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to this room for those who attended since yesterday, and welcome to those who came just this morning. It's really good to see you again for our second day of the CTRL+J APAC conference. Okay, we asked all of you yesterday what you hope to gain from our conference. So we would like to share with you the results. As you can see that most of you hope to learn more about first one, current trends affecting media, followed by innovation within media and media adjacent entities. You can read by yourself the rest of the findings. And at the top of everyone's mind, many of you feel, next slide please. Yeah, challenging when asked about what your thoughts are with the future of the media in the era of AI. Yeah. So yeah, that's that. We will come up with more Mentimeter questions later until until tomorrow. Yeah, the end of our conference. So while some of you are optimistic, and others are pessimistic about the direction that the media sector is taking, as practitioners, we still need to adapt and learn and prepare ourselves for the future. Whether we like it or not, change has been happening since the Web 2.0 era. And how we adapt ourselves to be more resilient will determine if there is hope toward building a solid and healthy information ecosystem. And we have exciting panels lined up for today to help us dig further. But before we continue, I would like to mention again, for those of you who would like to post about this event on your socials, you can use these following hashtags. Can we have that? Yeah, hashtag CTRL+J, hashtag CTRL+J APAC, and hashtag AI for journalism. Okay, let's kick in for our first panel. We have esteemed panelists to share their views on navigating AI and media. I would like to invite Sita Dewi from Project Multatuli to the stage to further introduce our panel and lead the first session. Sita, please take away.
Morning, everyone. I hope you had a good rest last night and a strong cup of coffee this morning, because we're on day 2 of this 3-day conference. My name is Sita, and I'll be moderating the first panel of the day. To pick up where we left off yesterday, a few key themes stuck with me when I reviewed my notes last night. One question came to mind. Are we doomed? Michael Markovits opened the first panel yesterday with a sobering reality check, highlighting the market failure of ad-supported media models, the collapse of public trust, and a historic failure to invest meaningfully in newsrooms. Many speakers throughout day 1 expanded on these concerns, particularly in the context of AI. How it's transforming our information ecosystem, challenging our digital rights, and shifting the ground beneath journalism itself. There was also a strong emphasis on collective action and the need for collaboration in facing these challenges. So, this morning we continue that conversation by diving deeper into how evolving geopolitics and changing user behaviors are reshaping the relationship between technology and media in our region. So, how are users, content producers, and policymakers adapting to this rapidly changing landscape of information production, distribution, and governance? To help us explore these questions, we are joined by 3 brilliant speakers from diverse backgrounds. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. The first speaker, Elina Noor, sorry. Elina Noor is a senior fellow in the Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where she focuses on Southeast Asia with particular attention to how technology is reshaping power, governance, and nation building. Elina has advised international bodies, including the Global Commissions on the Stability of Cyberspace, the ICRC Global Advisory Board on Digital Threats, and currently the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters. And then our second speaker, Jacque Manabat. She's a multi-platform journalist and content creator with 17 years of experience at ABS-CBN News. This is a very important information. She was the first Southeast Asian journalist to use TikTok's vertical infotainment format for news, earning her the platform's first verification for a Filipino journalist and international recognition at the Global Creators Festival in South Korea. That reminds me to be on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, by the way. Her work has been honored with awards, including Lagerway Communication Excellence Award and recognition as one of the 10 outstanding Filipino game changers of 2024. She now owns a creative lab for content creators and journalists, mentors newsrooms, and a staunch advocate for digital media literacy. And last but not least, our third speaker, Irendra Radjawali. He is a political ecologist with a background in engineering and expertise spanning complexity and data science, geography, and spatial analysis. His work focuses on human-nature interaction, particularly within social ecological systems. As a researcher, Irendra is affiliated with Center of Southeast Asian Studies at Kyoto University. Beyond academia, he has worked closely with the Indonesian government as a data scientist, contributing to the establishment of data centers and the development of public outreach and campaign strategies. So give it up for our brilliant speakers this morning. So in this panel, we have about 60 minutes for the whole discussion. And each of our speakers will talk for about 7-ish minutes before I proceed with the panel discussion and moderating questions from the audience. Elina Noor, the floor is yours. You can start our conversation.
Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. This is not my usual beat. I don't usually hang out with all the cool media folks. So thank you for welcoming me into your fold. I'm really excited to be here. I learned quite a bit yesterday. And this morning, I thought what I do for you is to try to widen the aperture a bit, to talk a little about the context of the geopolitics of AI. I note from yesterday that there were references to geopolitics, to ethics, as well as to market concentration by big tech. And so I thought this morning I would try to stitch some of those references and hopefully create a bit more of a bigger story for you to work off of. So let me do that by tabling 3 points for your consideration. The first point relates, of course, to geopolitics. And some of us may know that we read the headlines, you write the headlines about the geopolitics of AI in terms of the semiconductor chips, in terms of the fight for critical minerals. But this goes much, much wider and deeper. It flows through the entire value chain of AI. What do I mean by that? It's not only the hardware, it's not only the critical minerals that are extracted from our lands, it's not only the semiconductor chips that we help package, assemble, and test, but it's also the infrastructure that's being built in and around our landscape, including things like submarine communication cables, which, as you may know, accounts for more than 95%, some say 99% of all data flows around the world. It also relates to the data centers that are being built in our states, and it also relates to personnel, our talent, as well as the platforms that we use. So to give you an example, there's now an increase in the involvement of hyperscalers, so big tech companies like AWS, Google, Microsoft, even Meta, that are beginning to build their own cables in and around Southeast Asia in order to connect more efficiently to the data centers that they are also building in our countries. And as many of you will know, every Southeast Asian country is rushing to vie to be some sort of data center hub. So not only are they beginning to build cables to connect to the data centers that they are building, but they're obviously also offering cloud services to us. And so there's increasingly a market concentration, a concentration of power across the entire vertical stack of not just digital infrastructure, but also the services that are being provided. Of course, these companies will say they're doing it for efficiency, to reduce latency in speed, but it also does not bode well for us if we're not careful in negotiating our terms for our dependency or agency on many of these foreign big tech companies. We also, I think, have seen from the Ukraine example where concentration of power in just one player, i.e. Elon Musk's Starlink, can make or break the internet flow in some countries and some cases. And this sort of dependency, given the fact that between 2019 to 2023, some 23.5%, not to be too exact, of submarine cables around the world were actually built by or owned by hyperscalers themselves. And this number will only continue to grow. This just relates to ownership of cables. It doesn't include things like their participation in consortiums that build some of these cables. So this hidden infrastructure below the waves is something that we also have to be aware of when we think about AI, because ultimately it's the cables that transport the data that we rely on so much. If we look at another element of infrastructure, compute resources, for example, you look at the countries that are behind the companies that build these resources. You look at the chips, NVIDIA, Google's Trillium, Microsoft, and Huawei Ascend chips. Essentially, the breakdown is between the US and China. And the rest of us are simply trying to get access to the most advanced chips to build our own LLMs. So even though we are building smaller LLMs that are using our languages in this region, our LLMs are also derivative of these bigger products. And again, there is this question, possibly a challenge in the future of what this means for long-term agency or long-term dependency in this region. This also, I think, many of us have reported, many of you have reported on this, many of us in the think tank world have read about this, that even though we see the headlines of the geopolitical competition for AI resources, we also, I think, tend to underplay our own contributions in it. And there's a parallel economy that helps to build, in fact, the AI systems that we think are being built in the global north and then that are in turn sold back to us in the global majority. And this parallel economy relies on very colonial patterns of extraction and exploitation. So the minerals I talked about, but also natural resources that host and site the data centers. We have land that's relatively cheap. We have water, we have energy that's also relatively cheap compared to what is being offered in global north countries. We also have people who work on data annotating, labeling the data that helps train the AI, and who are not being paid enough. We've seen stories of them not only being subjected to terrible images and videos in order for us to consume these images and videos in a safe manner. So there's a whole shadow economy that is part of the AI economy that we are possibly missing. Point number 2 relates to regulations, standards, and norms. We've all seen the debates about where regulation on data is heading. There's a Brussels effect. There is the US fragmentation of data protection, very much depends on the states in the US. And there's the Chinese focus on consumer protection, apart from national security considerations, that's being directed in Beijing. And so where we sit in this region in relation to those data regulations depends very much on how much we trade with each of those countries. And so where we stand on data, for example, depends again on where we sit. But I think also there is the softer regulations, softer standards and norms that we are aware of, but that we are possibly not discussing as much. So the industry standard in terms of platforms and social media is still very much US-centric, still very much Western-centric. And all you have to do is look at your social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or other platforms that we all widely use, and note this Western bias. It results in, for example, the shadow banning and censorship, as has been reported by organizations like Human Rights Watch, of any Palestine-related content. And this gets very much real on the ground when human lives are at stake. And it questions our position, whether as academics, as think tankers, as journalists, on how we're able to access this information, how we're able to republish this information. So the standards are being set elsewhere, and we are simply being forced to be consumers for very much of it. Now, my third and final point. So what does this all mean, and what is the direction of AI for those of us here in this region? I think there's an assumption to a certain extent that the trajectory of AI will keep going upwards, that models will get larger and larger. But even people like Meta's head of AI, Yann LeCun, has sort of given up on LLMs. He said LLMs is not the way to go. He's moved on to something else. Because LLMs, as you know, rely on just massive troves of data. And even if you train an LLM, a sophisticated one, on as much data as you can, it will still not give you the perspective that we humans are able to interpret, digest. Our minds can do that. And so people like Yann LeCun have moved on to something else called joint embedding predictive architecture. So if people like him are moving on, people like Sam Altman and OpenAI are saying, hey, LLMs are getting bigger and bigger, and you need to be a part of this. I think we need to question the motives behind each of these different directional approaches. And obviously, there's an investment stake for companies like OpenAI, for Anthropic. But in the meantime, we are building out, as I mentioned earlier, our smaller LLMs in the region that rely on local indigenous languages. And here I think this is a very encouraging move, but it also, I think, puts into question what the use cases for our local LLMs will be, because it determines the impact on how we start to govern notions like data and privacy, not just for individuals, but also for the collective. So what does it mean for vulnerable communities, for example? What does it mean for indigenous populations in society? I think that Raja will talk about. So I have realized I haven't painted a very encouraging picture, perhaps, but I wanted to put out all these challenges before us in order for us to have a perhaps more composite picture of the future of AI. So thank you.
Thank you, Elina, for sharing your insight. Jackie, the floor is yours.
Hello there. I have my data, I have my numbers on my phone because I'm tasked to discuss about user behavior in the perspective of a journalist and the newsrooms. But, you know, I think we already know this, that everyone has their mobile phones here. And I've been here in Jakarta for a couple of times, even though when they're crossing the road, they're on their phones. I don't know why, watching TikTok or whatever. So I'd like to share with you a conversation I had with the panel and my fellow Filipinos over here, is journalism still relevant? Because I think that is the question for since yesterday. That's why we're talking about AI tools, how to do this engagement. But I think the answer lies in listening to the young audience, listening to the future. Now, let me share with you my journey. As mentioned a while ago, I was the first Southeast Asian journalist to leverage the vertical infotainment format of TikTok. It's because during the pandemic, this is the context, the company where I worked with before was shut down by the government. It's ABS-CBN. It's one of the biggest broadcasting network in the Philippines. So I was afraid for my job. I might lose my job, my dream job, that I've been there for almost half my life. So what do I do? What do I do? And then I saw a barrage of vertical, videos on my Facebook feed, on my Instagram. I wasn't on TikTok then. So I tried TikTok, simplifying the news, hijacking the trends, if that's the right term. And then I realized the young generation aren't really avoiding the news. We're not speaking their language. Yeah, we're not. We're not speaking their language. And if we want journalism to survive, if we want our newsrooms to survive, we listen and we speak their language. And as emphasized or stressed yesterday by my colleague here, J. Mark, yesterday, that students, they use a lot of AI when they go to schools, when they, there's a spike of the use of AI when it comes to the usage of the students. So they already know it. So will journalism be relevant to them in the future? Would they want to be journalists in the future? How about we listen to them, use their tools, like how they use social media, then we are on the table. Right? I think we deserve a seat on the table because we are trained journalists, we are trained managers. We have to let them feel that we are here for them. And there's been a divide there's always a divide between journalists and content creators. And I am a journalist and / influencer. It was difficult for me to embrace that. Influencer, because it has a lot of negative connotations. Influencer, they put out garbage, dance. I don't dance. I suck at dancing. But the young generation, they were engaging. Even though they know that it is a news story, they are engaging. So why aren't we speaking their language? Why aren't we using the tools that they are already using? AI. So in my content creation, see, I already use content creation, even though it's a news story. So in my content creation, I experimented with using AI, and I explained AI-generated images to explain news stories that I could not supply, photos and videos, sometimes too gory or too sensitive. And I explained it, that I use AI-generated. And there's no issue with the young generation. Not an issue. I think it's the case of just being transparent to your audience and being able to know when to use this AI-generated images. And there's nothing wrong with it. And again, who cares, right? As long as we do our job as journalists, we empower, we inform, and we educate. It may not look like the journalism that I did back then with the traditional news that I was with. I was not the reporter with a serious demeanor, with the full makeup on and with the collar, and I never smiled back then. But it's a news story that they are willing to engage and they are willing to act up on. And that's what I like about this young generation, is that they are huge on advocacies. And if they feel that you resonated with them, you want to relate to them, then they will act on it, whether your content has AI-generated images or not. And I also want to share my conversation with Sita in the panel. Like, they're now dropping the name journalism in schools because there's a huge drop of students, right? Yeah, application for journalism schools. So now they're calling it storytelling. Yeah, they're calling it storytelling, but it is storytelling. And I told her my observation. So on my first year, when I resigned from the traditional news media that I was with, I went around schools. I also dropped the name journalism in the content that I'm showing them, online content. And instead of telling it as journalism 101, I repackage it to content creation hacks. But what they don't realize is they're already learning how to fact check, how to use data, how to respect the privacy, you know, the training that we get as journalists. So my question, again, is what is journalism? Who are the journalists? Journalism is a function as long as we inform, empower, and we educate, regardless of the tools that we're using, digital platforms or AI, as long as we do our jobs, it is still journalism. Thank you.
So when we talk about consumers' behavior, now it's journalists who also have to change behavior. So that's the point. Thank you so much, Jacque. Very interesting and thought-provoking. So last but not least, what else are changing? Who else are changing? Mas Raja, please.
Thank you. I prepared something. Good morning. Oh, sorry. Thank you for inviting me. I prepared something that might be showed. Yes, thank you very much. Good morning. Raja here. Raja is here. Like Elina, I come not from the journalism world, so I hope I can share something this morning. Actually, my talk is going to be, or my intervention or my provocations would be on data and AI fetishism. So the fetish of data and AI, that's what I prepared before. So Elina has just mentioned very clearly about things. Yeah, this one. So this is the data fetishism. Next, Mas. So this is the pictures of that we oftenly see. The left one is just published from Harvard Business Review just last month, I believe. The use of generative AI among people in the world, and most of us all, most of us all use the generative AI for content creations, like what just said by Jacque. The right one, you can see how Indonesians use internet and how Indonesians use online social media. So Indonesians, how much? So Indonesians spend 7 hours and 45 minutes, I believe, per day in front of the internet, and 3 hours, 14 minutes per day in front of online social media, including, I also read, including the use of generative AI and so on and so on. But like just Elina said, what is behind? Yes, thank you, sorry. But behind this one is, this book is just published 2 months ago by Karen Howe, The Empire of AI. So what just Elina also said, that I just finished this book. Behind this one is, well, there are a lot of things. The right one, you can see how the outsourcing business is now, you know, a la mode going on the world. There are, and Kenyans, Nigerians, I believe also Southeast Asians also, they are part of these circuits of the productions of LLMs and pictures and knowledge, and to fit the machines behind the algorithm behind the AI. So Karen Howe also pointed out how the competitions over resources is also behind this big data or data centers. What is that? Water. In South America, I think in Peru, she reported that there has been some competitions of accessing water, groundwater, between data centers and indigenous communities, because you need clean water to cool down the data center. So this is the thing that that is behind the what's so-called the AI, what's so-called the big data centers nowadays. It brings me to the story I don't want to bring to you this morning this dystopian or sad things, but I try to, okay, let's do something, just like Jackie said, let's do something. So this is my personal experience, my own experience as a political ecologist. People know me as a drone makers. I do make drones since 15 years ago. DIY drones, do-it-yourself drones. Back then, I'm dealing with deforestations, the massive deforestations. And back then, we found out that the problem lies on maps. So the idea is how to counter maps. So I teach the indigenous people, I train the indigenous people how to make drones, how to make maps, and how to refute the maps against deforestations and against land degradations. By the way, this is like the real indigenous people. So I'm not orang hutan, but I'm orang from hutan. I mostly work outside of Java in hutan. So we managed to do it, and we managed to make it as a movement. And just 2 weeks ago, I just returned back from Makassar. This is the meetings between us, the people, the community members who live in the mining areas of nickel. So you've probably heard a lot about the nickel industries and how devastating it is in Indonesia. So we brought like 30 members of communities, including ibu-ibu, the ladies, including the youngsters, including everything. So we perform what's so-called the storytelling with data. Some of them have only 4 hours per day of electricity, so computer is something else. But we try our best to storytell using data, using pictures that you see, the pictures they take, and do storytelling, just what Jackie said, and bring it out of the world, to the world, and tell their stories. So you can see in the pictures, and in half day of the trainings, the ibu-ibu, the ladies, the youngsters, they manage to be able to tell their stories using the data. They manage even to refute the data made or developed by government. Hey, this data is wrong. This data is not correct. It doesn't make my logic because it's not the reality. Then I told them, let's then make your story. Make your story and then refute the data. So this is how we did it. And then yes, this was just from 2 weeks ago. So by showing this one, I want to share with you that it is actually possible. Like the previous speaker said, it is also actually possible to color the progress of this technology. But it has to be us involved. And you as journalists and medias, my friends, I think, in my opinion, it is very important to connect with these people. They have stories. They're clever. They know their stories, and it's important. But then somehow they're disconnect with, big medias or journalists or something. So maybe this is this is my propositions for this event, and yes, this is some of the books. We say artificial intelligence, but Meredith has published this very interesting book. It's called Artificial Unintelligence. By the way, she's a professor of AI, I believe in MIT, but then yeah, she wrote how computer might misunderstood us if the data source, if the technology only comes from limited sources or limited groups of persons. And the third book, the next book is Race After Technology. I'm very thrilled by this book. Ruha proved that AI might be racist. AI might be racist because AI itself is programmed, or the data source come from certain sources. So AI might be racist. So I suggest you to go on to explore these resources. And lastly, this is some questions that came up in my mind for us all. The so-called the techno-chauvinism. So we might want to think about the techno-chauvinism. We believe all humans' problem can be solved by technology. Let's ask ourselves. And fetishism, like the data and AI are the most powerful one, the super one. Well, let's see. And well, I always believe that behind any digital is analog. always. Digital is 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, binary, but analog is, it's not binary. It's bigger than binary. So there's something I always also believe that behind any artificial intelligence is natural intelligence, which is our brains, our connections, our system, ecosystem. And we have this collective intelligence. I would like to raise these questions. And lastly, there's this paramilitary, there's this paramedic, there's this paralegal. Well, we are paradata, probably. Community is paradata. Let's make paradata or whatever. That's the power of paradata. And I would close, it brings me to the last one. Here. Oops, it doesn't work. Anyway, all of this debate brings me to these kids' books, which I knew when I was already 30 years old. That the essential one is actually sometimes invisible for the l'essentiel est invisible pour les yeux. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mas Raja. And I think the three perspectives really capture the complexity of the moment where AI is not just a tool, but also a terrain of power. So I'll start the discussion by asking just one question to Elina. How do you see Southeast Asian governments navigating these changes? Like, are there particular governments leading or lagging?
Asked like a true journalist, just put me on the hot spot. So it's not for me to give a grade to any government, but I do see some encouraging signs. We all know that there are governments that are working with academics as well as with the private sector in this region to build our own LLMs that are based on local languages, that are based on cultures that are familiar to us. But as I mentioned in my remarks, these are still essentially derivative of much larger models. And it requires us to also know our own history and our own knowledge system. That I think arguably is not necessarily the case across all societies. Two is that there are also in the hardware space of AI, there are some encouraging movements. I know my government, the Malaysian government, has decided to embark on a 10-year investment venture with SoftBank's ARM industry to upscale the AI chip production value chain. So Malaysia has always wanted to be higher up in the value chain beyond just the assembly, packaging, and testing of semiconductor chips. But now they've embarked on this 10-year, it costs like a ridiculous amount of money, but it's for the long term in order for us not to be stuck at the lower end of the AI value chain. So there are some encouraging measures. We can always do better.
Thank you, Elina. So I'd like to invite you to join the discussion by sharing your insights or probably ask questions to our panelists. Are there any questions? I really wish to take as many questions as possible. The gentleman over there. Please introduce yourself, your organizations, and the panelists or speakers you address your questions to.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Reza. I'm a journalist myself from Katadata. I address my question to Jacque. Well, I'll speak from my own experience. I'll come from traditional newspaper culture, so then move to digital. But now you're speaking that from your experience that journalists must now evolve and try to learn, for example, become an influencer or, yeah, my boss told me that I need to learn on cam, but that's, I think, another burden for many journalists. And it's not for everyone. So my simple question, how can journalists evolve and learning something new but we have already learned many things. We need to excellent in writing, in editor, in editing, and now we have to learn how to
dance.
Perform on TikTok. So it's too much.
You have to dance.
So how do you think about this? Thank you.
I know, right? I'm a tired millennial myself. That's why I love the coffee here in Indonesia. Yes. Okay. I used to cover business in the Philippines, and one of its MVP, Manny V. Pangilinan, one of the big, huge names in the business industry, once told me this: evolve or die. Yes, evolve or die. Okay. I want you to imagine back in 2020. You know me as a TV journalist who's giving you the hard-hitting news, inflation, GDP, or whatever. But then you see me on the road pointing at the air, pointing at nothing. What was your reaction? What will be your reaction? Right? What is she doing? It's so cringe. that's so crazy. I mean, fellow journalists would turn their backs on me and call me crazy. But I don't care. I didn't care. It is news. I was telling them about the policies about in the transportation area in the Philippines. I didn't care, and I was having fun because the audience are engaging with me. And I mentioned a while ago that I feared for my profession, I feared for my job, that I would lose my job because the government shut down ABS-CBN. So I had to adapt and create my own brand, my digital brand. So if ever ABS-CBN kicked me out, which they didn't, I resigned, by the way, kicked me out, I do have added skills. So it's a matter of survival. I told you that story because evolving is surviving, right? So going back again to when video killed the radio star, it's so telling of our generation, huh? Video killed the generation star. I mean, who would imagine that they would see anchors, TV anchors on TV? We're used to print, we're used to radio. Who would have imagined that on Facebook, where we used to trade carrots or potatoes, would be a form of exchange of information? And remember, when we were applying for a job, I mean, I think it's my I'm gonna speak for my generation, learning how to use Excel file, right? Learning how to use computer or even the photocopier is a skill. They are skills. So we need to upskill always, because if we don't evolve, we die. Thank you.
You told me earlier that you were called newsfluencer. How do you feel about that, Jacque?
Well, initially, I didn't like it because the word influencer has negative connotations, right? They put out garbage. Yes, I call them garbage. But then I started to embrace it because I keep saying young generation, the young generation could relate to it, newsfluencer. And mind you, they will be the future consumers. They will be paying for our jobs. They will be paying our newsrooms and help us survive. So that's why I kept telling the newsrooms that I do workshops with, we speak the language of the future because they will help us survive. So yeah, I'm embracing the identity of being a newsfluencer.
And don't forget, they'll also be casting their votes every election.
Yes, and in the Philippines, more than, I think it's 60+% of the voting populations, millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Alphas, they are the decision makers. They also have this purchasing power. So if you want to have, our goal is to have a better nation, right? I think we have that one goal. So if we have that goal in journalism to empower them, inform them, and educate them, we target the decision makers, the voting population. And how do we do that? We evolve. So,
dance.
Yeah, maybe you could do your TikTok soon.
Thank you so much for the question. I see 3 hands from, 5, okay. Yeah. I'll get 3, yeah.
Thank you, Sita. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's really insightful. I have one question for Mbak Elina. You mentioned the race to build sovereign AI in some countries in the region, but you also warned that it's basically still a derivative of a higher technology dependency. What's your suggestion for policymakers or for us in the region that are still see the sovereign AI as an option because it's more transparent and accountable?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll gather the questions first. The lady with the broken white top, yeah,
Okay,
blazer.
thank you. Mas Irendra, my name is Ika Idris. I'm from Data and Democracy Research Hub at Monash University, Indonesia. Thank you for sharing your interesting projects. We're also doing projects on digital labor and another project is on geopolitical tension, how it's influenced the local disinformation. So my questions, after we talk to this digital labor, yeah, working on annotation, working on data, then we know we need to do something on literacy, data literacy about that. But it's really hard to talk about rights of privacy or data when the current condition in this economy. Yeah. It's really hard to talk about it when people like losing their jobs. And then there's no other option for now. So we also like kind of desperate in this situation because like we cannot just, if you read the news about like how people will trade their eye retinal for some monies, it's also like kind of desperate, yeah. So I would like to probably get inspiration from you if we want to create a literacy program letter related to this privacy rights, specifically for digital labor, what kind of narrative that we can bring to them, because like either economic narrative or rights to privacy narrative, yeah. And then economic narrative, it's their daily battle, yeah. And then for Elina, it's interesting that you mentioned about like how much a country would like to trade with the other countries. The option for Indonesia right now, either to take the investment or to give it to Vietnam. so I think when we talk to the government, it's also about losing the opportunity for investment from those countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last one for this round, the lady over there, I think. Yeah.
Hi, I think just to add on to all of those questions.
Your
I
name,
guess.
please?
Oh, yes, I'm Cynthia. I'm with CIJ. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, obviously all of this, I think, requires some level of capacity building. If I wanted to go and make TikToks, number one, if I knew how to, I wouldn't be able to necessarily successfully farm the algorithm among so much competition. So I'm sure there's a workaround around it, but in the first place, as previously mentioned, I mean, a lot of us don't know how to do it. So capacity building is one thing. And another thing is all of this requires resources. I think you mentioned sort of, you know, the situation in Africa with indigenous persons and, you know, just basically access as well is another issue. So if we do not have the resources, especially in media where, you know, it's a big struggle economically, then what's a workaround we can do realistically? Yeah.
Thank you so much for the question. Anyone want to start?
Yeah. So you asked the question, what if TikTok or the videos are not for you? Well, how about get someone to do it for you or use AI voice to do it for you? You don't have to be camera facing to do these videos. That's the beauty of social media. I mean, there's creative freedom. You could go beyond the template of news reports. You could go beyond the template of writing for print. You have the creative freedom. And there's a lot of ways to tell the stories. But for journalists, aren't we in the best position to be telling stories, to be telling the news? And what just changed is how we tell these stories, but what didn't change is how we gather the information. We are trained for that. How we fact-check information, find sources, read data. We have the tools, but it's just that the storytelling has changed. So we need to get their attention to get our message across. The basic communication theory is that there's a messenger, there's a message, and there's the receiver. But what's happening right now, there's a lot of messages muddling the line that now the receiver chooses where to get their information. So where do we get their information is it's from the people that they think they could relate to. And as mentioned a while ago, we TV journalists, I was a TV journalist back then, we have this strict demeanor, right? Would you want a friend to tell you something about their day or what they experienced, or someone you don't really know and with a strict demeanor to tell you about what happened? And if you're going to ask a Gen Z that, or if you're going to ask the future or the young generation that question, they would rather get their information from a friend. That's why when you look at influencers, and when you look at my content, please follow me. Joke. If you want to look at my content, it's like I am speaking to you like a friend. How about if we tell the news like a friend? Right? So we just have to tweak the way we tell stories, but the ethics, the news gathering, the data checking, or the whatnots are still there. So again, I say, we are in the best position. We just have to be relatable and be authentic and just be there for them.
Thank you, Jackie. Elina, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you for the questions, Pak Wahyu and Ibu. I think there are overlaps in the two questions, so let me try to provide a response in 2 points. One, I think this move towards sovereign AI is a good thing, and we should continue pursuing sovereign AI, depending on how we define it. But Pak Wahyu, as you mentioned, there are inherent difficulties with that, and I think one of the workarounds that I can foresee right now is that we ask ourselves, what are the use cases for this sovereign AI? Is it just for prestige? Is it just for image? Or is it really to help people on the ground, communities that need it most? And the indications right now from different developers in the region is that we in the region are not interested in competing with OpenAI. They're far too big, it requires too much capital, we don't have the resources for that. That's completely out of bounds. It is instead to help the people on the ground. But if we can hold truth to power to make sure that that actually is the case, then I think we avoid some of the pitfalls of this race downhill. As a corollary to that, I think it's really important to have transparency in the negotiation deals that are being done with big tech. And these details are often hidden, as I've been told, by both government and big tech officials under NDAs, which is ridiculous. We're supposed to take the word of government and big tech that, oh, EIAs have been conducted and local communities have been consulted. A lot of the cable negotiation deals that are being done now have national security riders to the agreement. Actually, they're not even riders, they're full-on separate agreements. So Google and Meta, for example, have to sign a national security agreement with the US government in order to build some of these cables under FCC rules. And what this means is that these national security agreements protect the data of US citizens, but not the citizens of the other countries that depend on those very same cables. So I think for us on the ground, it's asking questions of our governments, are our rights and data being protected in the same way? If not, why? Which gets to the question about investment. Yes, I think the political realities are such that we have to compete because we have comparative advantages, and unfortunately, we also have competitive advantages. Indonesia with Vietnam, Malaysia with the Philippines, and in chips, for example. But I think the bigger picture is there a different way of doing things where, as some economists in Indonesia have argued, we collectively negotiate. So rather than competing, we try to align some of our comparative advantages with each other, and we negotiate collectively on the issue of tariffs, for example. I think we have to realize that this is part of the divide and rule tactic. So we pit countries against each other and we say, hey, if Vietnam gets this much, Indonesia is going to get this much less. And that's a terrible strategy for us to fall into. So in a more ideal world, is there a different way of doing things where we get together collectively as ASEAN countries to say, let's work things out amongst ourselves and figure out what we can bring to the table with much bigger powers?
Oh, thank you so much, Elina. Mas Raja, do you want to address the last question?
Yes, thank you very much, Ibu, for the questions. It's a very tough question, definitely, Ibu, because it's the feeling of the importance of your data is not always in everyone. So, I probably can't answer you, but I'll try my best to tell the stories from the daily life or the daily life that I'm doing with my friends and comrades from the environmental activists. The more you show where you are, the more you share, the more you are in danger. There are some cases. In, I believe in South America, I think 600-ish people, activists, are killed every year. Because of their activism, for sure, but I can't remember the number. But your safety also depends on how you manage your data, how you deal with your data. Also, it happens here. I can't really say who, but we experience some of our colleagues, some of our comrades. They got surveyed by the systems because they share. But it's not that, I don't want to say that we can't share, no. But then it's not easy. There's no, one particular answer, Ibu. But I believe it's always there between, the need between being recognized for your economic reasons and the need to be safe, the need to be the need also to be protected in terms of data. So I think what we can do, Ibu, is always put it there and put it here in the head of the people, of the communities, that yes, you can share, definitely, but there's always risk. And we can Google or we can search in the internet some cases where, sharing sometimes is, in several cases, sometimes is putting yourself in danger as well. So yeah, telling this Orwellian world is not easy, but it is there. And I believe in Indonesia, in the Indonesian case, our, I would say, justice system or our government is surveying us. I mean, it's super clear through different tools, using different data, different set of data that they can get from different sources. So I hope it answers. I know it's not, but and from you, yes, capacity building is definitely the thing. Definitely the thing. Again, from my experiences. When you can show, when you can be relevant to the community that you are dealing with, you're serving with, they will find their way. They will find their way to find resources, and there's always resources there. It's just that to develop this trust and this this confidence, collective confidence. There are always resources. That's based on my experience. Even some of the communities, they have only 4 hours of electricity per day. And internet, wow, internet is the alien things. But then they just biking from the upstreams of the central Sulawesi, going down and find 3G internet, and they search something, pop, 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 and then they return back again, biking there for 6 hours. But then they develop something, and they develop stories, and they put it in the Instagram, in the TikTok about their stories. So I think once you become relevant, it's always there. I hope it answers you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mas Raja. We have around 3 minutes left. I can take one more question, or okay, one quick question. One sentence. Sorry.
Apples. Hello, my name is Srikandi. I don't have a background in journalism, but I am from Generation Z, so I think
We have Gen Z representation.
yeah, it might give some insight. So there's a niche segment of us that boycotts AI because we know the environmental impact of it, and then we know how it steals data, it steals people's artwork and stuff. There was a college student in Indonesia who did a thing to provoke AI regulation. It was a hot topic this year or last year, I think. But yeah, she got imprisoned. So yeah. So what I'm saying here is to look for the future, you gotta speak in Gen Z's language. But what about those who boycott AI for those reasons and indigenous communities aren't represented, like Ms. Elina and Pa Raja said, and then the environmental impacts of it that indigenous communities will face first. And so, and the three of you said to adapt to the future, but is it not adapting if we don't condone that?
How many are you?
I'm sorry. Oh,
How niche? Like two people club?
yes, it's just me and my friend. No. Yeah, there's a lot of Gen Z. I'm mostly active on Twitter, and people there.
Twitter, very
Yeah.
millennial.
Yeah.
You're embracing our lifestyle while we're embracing yours. No. Okay, thank you so much.
I hope my questions were clear. I'm sorry, I was nervous.
No worries, you're doing well. Thank you so much. Any quick response and closing remarks?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, in my opinion, but, well, again, I'm sorry if I sound of bringing these dystopian things, but I'm not. In my opinion, if you put this anti in the context of anti-thesis, so you try to find the synthesis of the thesis, so dialectics, then I think it's good. But if anti is just anti, I think it's also gonna be a problem because the thing is progressing anyway. So that's my take actually. So put it in this sense and then ground it into something material. In my opinion, the base of AI is data, yes. But who created data? Who's the para data? Who's how the data is being analyzed? Who's turning the data into informations? Who's turning information into knowledge and insights? I think we should really go there. And I think another one is, I think as, well, social scientists, journalists, activists should enter there. It's not the domain only for the tech guy, tech bro, they say, right? The tech bro. No, it's the domain of us all. I think we should go there and, voice it loudly. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna make it simple. This pencil could do a lot of things other than writing. You could prick someone with it, right? Or throw it, or I don't know. This has lots of uses. But who's holding the pen still? Who's holding the pencil? So it is up to us how we use this technology Back then, there were no televisions. Back then, there's no computers. Back then, there's no Grab. It's so convenient. I think it's up to you how you use AI, as long as you're responsible and ethical. And I agree with you. We cannot be absolutes in the world of fast-paced technology. It's hard, really. So, okay, we don't have time, but maybe I'll part with this message is that we use these tools, again, because we care. We care, and we want our audience to care. So for them to care is we need to care first. We go to the ground and we use the tools that are available to us. So again, evolved, or in your lingo, evolve or be unalived. Thank you.
But thank you for sharing your insight with us. Elina, do you have?
I know we're out of time, so maybe just one sentence. I'd encourage you to lean in to your self-awareness and look at the picture in totality. I think very often, for whatever reason, we're caught in our own silos, but it's really important to talk to other people and to learn from different disciplines in order to have that bigger picture.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your insights. So I hope this panel gives you fresh perspective to take into the rest of today's discussions. So please join me in thanking once again our brilliant speakers this morning, Elina, Jacque, and Raja, for sharing your insights and your passion with us this morning. Thank you so much.